Hello, we're traveling across the pond for this story, requested by one of our listeners, Trisha. Hope you packed well. YouTube is trying to destroy my channel. Please like, subscribe, get an exorcist, something. It's March 8th, 1915. Scotland Yard, yes, the one and only, are on the case. London, England. A case that already is being called the Bride's Dead in a Bathtub Case. Not the most succinct nickname, but it does tell you all you need to know. Some weeks earlier, officials had arrested a man, then known as George Smith, living in the Holloway area of London. The charge? A minor charge of forging marriage certificates. Smith had been going under the name John Lloyd at this time. Confused? Sure. Holding him for that small charge, the authorities began to look into him a bit more. It's thought that at this point in time, Smith had been married about 6 times, averaging 1 new wife per year. 3 of those 6 wives no longer living. Their bodies have already been exhumed because supposedly those 3 had been found dead shortly after each was married, found deceased in their respective bathtubs. So there would be an inquest. Mrs. Lloyd's body, because he was assuming the name John Lloyd. Her death verdict had been natural causes. Her maiden name was Margaret Lofty, but interestingly, the police were suspicious of Smith/Lloyd, looking into his life, his wives, their funerals. They would come to realize at this point that 2 of his other former brides had been drowned in their baths, just like Mrs. Lloyd. And of course, a possible motive for this was the fact that Smith would insure each woman for moolah. Ah, yes, life insurance and wills. It's a couple of weeks later, March 23rd. George Joseph Smith, we got a middle name in there now, has been charged with the murder of 3 of his wives in the Bow Street court. Each woman had been killed in her bath shortly after Smith had married each of them. Smith had several fictional names that he would use during his marriages. Independent with a little bit of money in pocket, he was at this time in his mid-40s. He had been born in London, the son of a life insurance agent, of all things. His parents were considered respectable people, but in childhood he was said to have been more mischievous than most at his age, bordering on vicious, and getting talking tos from parents and teachers had no effect. At some point, he would be sent to reformatory school. He would start doing some crime, which we'll talk about later. At this point in time, in 1915, he was said to be tall with small, deep-set eyes, long nose and slightly protruding cheekbones, strong, well-chiseled chin, droopy mustache, would be described as an ordinary Englishman in appearance. The women and the dates of their supposed murders. Beatrice Mundy, July 1912. Alice Burnham, December 1913. Margaret Lofty, December 1914. So first, we're going to give you a brief history of the 6 wives we know about at this point, with more information to come as we go along. Wife number 1, 1898. George Joseph Smith, 26, parading as George Oliver Love, married Caroline B. Thornhill at Leicester. Deserted her. She has been living in Canada. Allegedly, hers is the only legit marriage. The rest are considered bigamous. Wife number 2, 1908. Apparently Smith's one true love affair. Under his right name, he married Edith Mabel Pegler at Bristol. She is still alive at this point, and after the deaths of each of his other wives, he always returned to Pegler. Wife number 3, 1910. Smith, parading as Henry Williams, married Beatrice Mundy at Weymouth, August 25th. Deserted her, taking $500 of her money. Met her again March 14th, 1912. On July 13th, 1912, she died in a bathtub. Her will brought Smith $12,500. Wife number 4, 1913. Smith, under his proper name, married Alice Burnham of Portsmouth on November 4th. She made her will out to Smith, and on December 12th, she died in a bathtub. Death brought him $2,500. Wife number 5, 1914. As Oliver Charles James Smith, on September 7th, he married Alice Revale at Woolwich. She was alive when he deserted her. Wife number 6, 1914. On December 17th, as John Lloyd, Smith married Margaret Elizabeth Lofty. She made out her will to him, and on December 18th, she died in a bathtub, arrested as a result of trying to collect $3,500. Through this story, I'm going to periodically mention each wife by her first and or last name and the number of wife she was. Please know, I mean absolutely no disrespect to any of them. But we have a lot of people in this story. Hopefully referring to them by number will also help our viewers and listeners. Margaret Lofty, number 6, and Smith got married at a registry office in Bath, December 1914. They arrived in London later that same day, and the next morning, she was found dead in the bathtub. Smith would call a doctor to report her death. An inquest was held, and the coroner's jury would say it was accidental death. So that was December 1914. By February 1915, the police would learn that Lloyd was not the right name, and things would start to unravel. A man who had been arrested for and released for the death of Alice Burnham, number 4, in November 1913, was identified as George Joseph Smith. He married Burnham in Portsmouth. A month later, she was dead in the bathtub. Coroner's jury had called that one accidental death. Then police went back further to a woman who had believed she was marrying a man named Henry Williams in Herne Bay, and she had died in her bath not long after her marriage. And police think that Williams is Smith. And shockingly, Smith had faced the coroner's jury for each of these 3 deaths at the time they had happened and would be cleared each time. Now, it wasn't clear to me, but I believe we're going to the grand jury right now. Prosecutor Botkin would say, quote, "The case is remarkable for the greed for wealth which was the dominant motive in the taking of these 3 lives. We shall show that at the death of 2 of them, £2,800, $14,000, was obtained, and that the prisoner, when arrested, was in a fair way to obtain £700, $3,500 more." End quote. Prosecutor Botkin would also say that Smith would court each lady and got a will from each of them, which made him the sole beneficiary. Botkin, quote, "In the death of these 3 women, precisely similar circumstances existed. Each died of drowning in her bath, and each was first discovered by the prisoner." End quote. March 29th, Smith faced with witnesses would shout at them, quote, "All lies! Detectives have bribed these witnesses." End quote. Apparently, this particular outburst occurred when apartment housekeepers testified that Smith always made sure there was a bath in the apartment he was going to rent. April 1st, a doctor who examined Margaret Lofty's body, she died in December 1914, said that she had appeared to have died of suffocation, not from natural causes. Caroline Thornhill, his first wife, who we'll talk about more in a minute, now known as Mrs. Love, was asked to stand up and face the prisoner. Smith refused to look at her. Mrs. Love would actually say she still had feelings of affection for him, and she broke down in tears. Both of her parents would testify that their daughter had indeed married Smith in 1898, but you can only be stone-faced for so long. Smith, by the end of that day, would shout at the prosecuting attorney, quote, "You manufacturer of criminals! How dare you say I murdered my wife? Go on, try to prove it." End quote. Now, before we jump to the actual trial, we're going to talk about wife number 1. His first wife was Caroline Beatrice Thornhill, who he married in 1898, assuming the name George Oliver Love. Sorry I keep saying it that way, but I can't help it. She's still alive and is the one living in Canada and now in London for these proceedings. Allegedly, she's his only real wife. The rest are considered bigamous marriages, as Caroline was alive and kicking during all of the rest of them. Her courtship would last a whole 2 months. He did like to speedily woo the gals, but soon all pretenses were dropped. Smith would try to get Caroline to get involved in his scheming, but she wouldn't have it, and supposedly he would be in prison for a couple of years for it. Now, I don't know what he had been accused of. But after he got out, he returned to Leicester and got called out by Caroline and her friends, and he would leave her. And she left London to head to Canada to get far away from him. Now we're going to talk about wife number 2, Edith Mabel Pegler. Pegler was the one woman that he always went back to and lived with in between marriages. He met her in Bristol some 10 years after Caroline Thornhill, and they had a whirlwind courtship, married July 30th, 1908. At this point, he was dealing in antique furniture. The couple would travel a lot for his work, and when he was busy courting others, Pegler probably thought he was traveling long distances so he could go pick up an antique bed frame. As far as I could tell, no one suspected Pegler of being involved at all or knowing about what he was up to. Nothing to speak of for a bit. We'll rejoin this story May 24th as we get to the actual murder trial. According to the paper, this case is holding the attention of the world in spite of the Great War, World War I, happening. Chickasha Daily Express, May 24th, 1915. Quote, George Joseph Smith is a name that carries as many shudders in England these days as the most gruesome stories of the battlefield. It's a name that suggests to every man and woman in England the abysmal depths to which the human mind can descend. It's a name that suggests anew how, here and there, among humanity, a being who looks like a man, talks like a man, and goes his way among men, unnoticed, may, after all, possess so little heart and soul, and so little of that name of human being does not belong to him, and he stands, when discovered, an unnamed, unplaced creature in the list of living things. End quote. Not only would he have the wives sign their wills to make him the beneficiary, but they would lie for him to their relatives. He would force his wives to write letters to their loved ones to say he was just a great guy. Beatrice Mundy, number 3, was the daughter of a bank manager and met Smith in Weymouth. She had been left $12,500 by her mother, and this is what she had been subsisting on. Within 3 days of meeting Smith, they would be married. He tried to get her $12,500. Her relatives weren't having it, so he gave up. He instead took $500 in gold from her and left her. Her relatives, finding her without money, took her back in. So Smith would go back to Pegler, number 2, paid off her $400 mortgage, and stayed with her for 2 years. Then in March 1912, he found himself before Beatrice Mundy by coincidence, and he persuaded her to forgive him. I guess she did, but then he tried to get her $12,500. Relatives weren't having it, but he persuaded her to make a will so that he would be beneficiary. I don't know what he told her to get her to do this stuff, but she did. She made a will, and he bought a bathtub. July 5th, the bathtub arrived. July 8th, the will was written up and sealed. July 10th, he told a doctor his wife was suffering from a fit of some sort. The doctor prescribed medicine. July 12th, the doctor called again. July 15th, Smith sent a note to the doctor, quote, "Do come at once. I am afraid my wife is dead," end quote. The doctor would arrive and would find her drowned in the tub. Smith got her $12,500 and went back to Pegler. Flush with cash, he and Pegler would open up antique shops in various places. But, when a scheme works, you keep scheming because he just can't get enough. Alice Burnham, number 4, came on the scene, a nurse with street smarts. But she was head over heels for Smith. She had $500 saved up at her parents' house. Smith would write them to send it. Her family wanted to know about his family. He would write, quote, "Sir, in answer to your application regarding my parentage, etc., my mother was a bus horse, my father a cab driver, my sister a rough rider in the Arctic regions, and my brother a sailor on a steam roller. This is the only information I can give to those who are not entitled to ask such questions as are contained in your letter. Your despised son-in-law, George Smith." End quote. Oddly enough, Alice's parents sent the money. My own mother would have had choice words for such rudeness. December 10th, the couple arrived in Blackpool. Smith would take her to a doctor and tell the doctor she was having some fits, laying the groundwork as he had done with Beatrice number 3. That night, she told the landlady that she would like a bath. Smith came into the kitchen a bit later and said that, quote, "I've just been out to buy some fresh eggs for breakfast," end quote. Then he headed upstairs and called for help. The landlady ran upstairs and found Smith holding the head of Alice in the tub, but allegedly he may have messed up a little. Her funeral arrangements were not much. He robbed her of her wedding ring, and apparently did some other things that made the landlady none too happy, not acting the part of a truly bereaved man whose wife had just shockingly died. Smith got $2,500 from Alice's insurance, and $500 he had gotten from her will, and he went back to Pegler. Some 9 months passed. Smith would marry an Alice Revale. I would see in much later sources the last name was Reed, but I'll stick with the newspapers for now. He was under the assumed name of Oliver Charles James. Revale would not be one of the deceased somehow. Not much was known about her. To be honest, not all of the newspapers even mentioned her existence. But in any case, they were married September 17th, 1914. 3 months later, he swerved and married Margaret Lofty in Bath. Smith and Lofty went to Highgate for their wedding trip and took a house that had a bathtub. The next morning, after eating breakfast, because you shouldn't skip breakfast unless you're intermittent fasting, they went to find a lawyer and make out a will so that Lofty could give Smith all that she had, $3,500, if she died. When they returned that afternoon from a walk, Lofty asked the landlady to prepare a bath. Just a bit later, Smith would come into the kitchen, not with eggs this time, but tomatoes. Quote, "I've just been down to the market to get some tomatoes for my wife. Now I'm going to run upstairs to see how she is getting along," end quote. He shouted his wife's name from the stairwell. Then he cried out, quote, "My God, she doesn't answer," end quote. He ran upstairs and said, quote, "Here she is in the bathtub. Come up and help me," end quote. Unlocked bathroom doors. Were these women not locking the doors in a public rooming house while bathing? And how convenient that Smith could get in so quickly? So she's died in the tub. He tried to get the $3,500 left to him, except she left it to him as John Lloyd, the name he was going by. But he couldn't prove he was John Lloyd to get the money. So that's how he got arrested for marrying Lofty under an assumed name. Doing all of this in London? Big mistake. Big, huge. London newspapers read all over the country and then some. Alice Burnham's family read the newspapers, saw the story about Smith getting arrested for giving the wrong name, saw his picture, and saw that Lofty had died in the tub just like their daughter Alice had. They went to Scotland Yard and reported this. The landlady in Blackpool, who didn't like the way Smith acted after Alice Burnham's death, she contacted the police. The family of Beatrice Mundy? Same. Her brother actually had been suspicious when she died, writing to the coroner and asking the coroner to dot his I's and cross his T's during the investigation. Smith took exception to this and played the part of a grieving widow so well, he gained sympathy from everyone. We're back in the present, June 22nd, 1915. A large crowd stuffed themselves into the courtroom at the Old Bailey, women primarily being the majority. Artists and photographers were also there, except the judge would say that no sketches or photos could be allowed in court. Smith would take the prisoner's box, smiling at his chief counsel, Marshall Hall, who is said to be the leading criminal lawyer of England and a member of Parliament. Smith's formal plea was basically him shouting, "Not guilty! Not guilty! It's all a lie!" After the judge, Justice Scruton for this one, got control of proceedings, Prosecutor Bakken would begin opening statements. Remember the term bluebeard from our episode about Henri Landru? We've got another bluebeard here. Prosecutor would label Smith a bluebeard of modern times and said that the Crown's evidence would show that Smith had killed the 3 wives in their baths in order to get their life insurance. Prosecutor would continue how Smith had an influence over women, the women deserting their homes and families and friends, giving their savings to him. It was recounted how he stole Beatrice Mundy's $500, she forgave him, and willed him $12,500. And then she was found dead. Quote, the prisoner's contention that Beatrice Mundy suffered a fit and drowned accidentally is ridiculous. The Crown will show that the position in which the body was found makes this entirely impossible. End quote. Prosecutor would go on to recount the other marriages. Burnham, who was found dead. Revelle, still alive. Lofty, whose death caused suspicions, finally. And again, bringing up how the 3 women were found dead, nude, in their baths, in rooming houses where a woman would not consider leaving her door unlocked while in a vulnerable state. June 23rd, we've got first witnesses. Smith, in his little prisoner's pen, scowled at Herbert Mundy, uncle of his first victim, Beatrice. He recounts the money she had inherited from her father, bank manager. She met Smith under the name Henry Williams, married him after 3 days. She gave Smith $500 in gold against her relative's wishes. Smith deserts her. Then 2 years later, they meet by chance at Weston-super-Mare. 2 months later, she makes a will, leaving Smith the rest of her money. June 24th. The bathtub where Beatrice Mundy met her death was actually brought into the court today. A doctor, Dr. A.J. French, testified that he had been called by Smith to come actually the day before she died, Smith saying she was suffering a fit. The doctor arrived and found Beatrice to be perfectly fine, except suffering from a mild headache. Quote, the prisoner insisted that something was wrong with his wife. I examined her but found her pulse and heart normal, and absolutely no symptoms of a fit. Her only complaint was a slight headache. The following morning, I was again summoned to the house. I found the young woman dead in a bathtub. The tub was 3/4 full of water. Her head was underwater, and her legs extended out over the sides of the tub. End quote. This is when the tub was brought out, the doctor describing the position of her body, Smith apparently showing a lot of interest. Oddly, the doctor would testify that she had died of suffocation, but he admitted that he had told the coroner she had died of an epileptic fit. Why on earth would he do that? A lawyer would testify how Smith had sought him before Beatrice's death to arrange the couple's wills, whereby everything they each owned would go to the other in case of death. June 25th. Today's testimony centers on his second victim, Alice Burnham, on December 12, 1913, in Blackpool. Mainly we're recounting what I've already mentioned. She was a nurse who met Smith a year after he had gotten Beatrice's money, married him 2 months later, gave him $500, and insured her life for $2,500 with Smith as beneficiary. A South Sea insurance agent would say that it was in South Sea that the pair met, and Alice promptly took out $5,000 worth of life insurance, which at that time she said it was for her mother. Quote, next day Smith married Miss Burnham. End quote. I guess at some point she changed this to Smith? 6 weeks later, Smith wrote to the insurance agent announcing that his wife had died. Smith visited the agent and produced his wife's will, which the witness was surprised by because Smith had told him that he would not allow his wife to make a will. Smith allegedly said he too was surprised because he found the will after her death. The witness would testify that the will had listed Smith as a beneficiary. Dr. Harold Burroughs testified that he had examined Alice at the time she requested the insurance policy, found she was in splendid physical condition. Her mother, Mrs. Burnham, would testify that when Alice was a child, she had what was believed to be epilepsy, but had not had a fit in many years. Lodging keepers said that Smith was very specific about wanting a bath in their room, and in Blackpool refused lodgings that did not have a bath. Finally taking an apartment in Mrs. Crossley's house. Mrs. Crossley would say that the night following the couple's arrival, a bath had been prepared for Alice. Water leaked through the ceiling into the kitchen, something that had never happened before. Later, Smith would enter the kitchen from the street, seeming to be agitated, according to Mrs. Crossley. He called upstairs, quote, "Alice, put the light out," end quote. He then went upstairs and discovered the body in the bath. Smith would interrupt the court proceedings at this point to shout, quote, "This woman is a lunatic," end quote. Pot calling the kettle black? June 27th, Smith is convinced that within the week he will be acquitted. His lawyer, Marshall Hall, quote, "The Crown's evidence thus far has been entirely circumstantial. The Crown has not yet proven that one of these women died an unnatural death," end quote. Today's testimony was mainly about Margaret Lofty, how a day after she married Smith and had signed a will giving him $3,500, that she had been found dead in a tub in Highgate. Again, this is the case that brought Smith to the attention of Scotland Yard, not for the deaths just yet, but for the use of a fake name in marrying Margaret. The landlady of the house that Margaret Lofty and Smith were staying in testified that she heard a splashing in the bathtub and then a sigh. She believes she may have overheard the death of Margaret. June 29th. Prosecutor Botkin would ask questions of Dr. Spilsbury, coroner's physician, who did the post-mortem for Margaret Lofty. Quote, "In your opinion, is it possible that any of these three women drowned accidentally?" End quote. Quote, "Possible, but altogether unlikely," end quote. Now, Smith didn't like this testimony, glared at the witness and the prosecutor alternately. Spilsbury would say about Alice that it would have been impossible for someone of her size to have been submerged in either a sitting or lying down position in the bathtub if it was like the one brought into the court. Apparently, Smith had said he had found her lying on her left side in the tub. Dr. Spilsbury would niet this, saying, quote, "If this is true, it would have been impossible for her arm to have been bruised as it was found to be," end quote. With the amount of water that had allegedly been in the tub, it would not have been difficult to drown her forcibly. Marshall Hall got his mitts into Spilsbury when it was his turn. Quote, "Now it has been shown that Beatrice Mundy Smith clutched a piece of soap in her hand when her body was found in the bathtub. Do you think it probable that a woman struggling with a man who was drowning her would retain her hold on a piece of soap?" End quote. Quote, "It would appear unlikely," end quote. Marshall Hall then read to the jury the coroner's report regarding Mundy, that the coroner had suggested that she had suffered from an epileptic attack, became unconscious, and drowned. Another doctor, Dr. Wilcox, would agree with Spilsbury, and both felt like the three women had their legs lifted and pulled while they were in the tub until their heads were completely underwater. Dr. Wilcox said he didn't think any of these deaths were from accidental causes. Smith didn't like any of this. He would shout, quote, "I don't care whether you sentence me to death or not," end quote. Well, that's good. You've just made the jury's decision even easier. June 30th. Prosecutor Botkin closed his part of the trial today with a statement that Smith was, quote, "one of the most cunning and cold-blooded criminals of modern times. With all the cunning of a great criminal, this man invented the epilepsy theory to explain away the death of each of his wives. He surveyed carefully the surroundings of each of his murder scenes and rehearsed in his mind the most insignificant details to make certain he could not be trapped. But like other shrewd murderers, he left loopholes," end quote. Marshall Hall would say that no sane man, and there is no insanity defense here, could be guilty of, quote, "one of the most diabolical series of continuous crimes which ever have been recorded in any country. You must go back to the days of the Borgias for a parallel," end quote. The evidence of the doctors would bring Marshall Hall to say, quote, "Such medical evidence opens the doors for the worst form of Americanism in the administration of British justice. Suppose that the prisoner had not been a pauper, as he is, but possessed of unlimited means like many recent American prisoners. He could secure experts to say that the cause of death was other than the one given by experts for the Crown," end quote. I must say, he ain't wrong. You got lots of money to give, you can get you lots of experts. Justice Scruton, giving the jury directions, would advise them to do something interesting. He told them they needed to experiment with a bathtub. that the jury may consider the possibility of turning on the water and lifting a wife into the tub. Even though the justice admitted that there was no evidence of this in the case, the jury could consider that possibility. Really, Judge? You're recommending husbands dump their wives in the bath just to see? Dear. July 1st. Old Bailey was heavily packed with women today for the jury to begin deliberations. Justice Scruton would advise the jurors to confine their verdicts only to Beatrice Bundy's case. Quote, but you should also consider whether the fact that 3 of the prisoner's wives were drowned in their baths was a mere accidental coincidence, or whether these circumstances indicated a diabolical scheme of murder. You must take into consideration, too, that the prisoner has been proven guilty of systematic lying in his statements in other tribunals. End quote. The justice would continue to say that the jury should consider if Smith had opportunity and motive. He had opportunity for sure, and if the jury could see what Smith would have gained by the wives dying, they would have motive. But even then, the jury may still question if the deaths were accidental or intentional. If it was found to be an accident, did that accident benefit Smith so many times that the accident could have come about only by intention? Quote, if the prisoner is convicted, it must be on circumstantial evidence. But you can vote to convict if you are reasonably certain that the prisoner is guilty. There is no doubt that the prisoner had ample opportunity to commit these crimes. End quote. And Judge, you're basically laying the red carpet out and writing their ballots for them. LOL. On giving the case to the jury, Smith would come down on Justice Scruton and his unfair charges, stating, quote, you've tried to hang me. You can't hang me for murder. I've done no murder. This is a disgrace to a Christian country. End quote. And mic drop. The jury would find him guilty of Beatrice Bundy's murder. They deliberated a whole 22 minutes. Before sentencing, Smith was asked if he wanted to say something. He took a little time to gather his thoughts, seemingly a bit out of it after the guilty verdict. Quote, I can only say I am not guilty. End quote. He was immediately sentenced to death by Justice Scruton. Unless his assumed appeals are successful, he will be hanged at the Maidstone Jail July 27th. Justice Scruton would say nothing to the prisoner about repentance because what was the point? How could such a man repent? Quote, I don't believe there is another man in England who needs to be warned against the commission of such a crime, and to exhort you to repentance would be a waste of time. End quote. The judge would openly say he was in agreement with the verdict. What? Really, Judge? Nah. As Smith was taken back to his cell, he would thank his counsel, Marshall Hall, for what he had done, adding, quote, I still have great confidence in you, and I shall bear up. End quote. From then on until his hanging, his appeal went nowhere. He would tell prison people, convicts, and workers about the money he had left. He made his own will and had one of the wardens witness it, leaving money to Edith Pegler. Oddly, he would not let Pegler come visit him. In fact, he allowed no visitors. August 13th. Allegedly, it was said that Smith had confessed prior to his death, but this hasn't been verified. Scotland Yard put out a statement regarding Smith's criminal record, not released prior to the trial in an attempt not to further prejudice the jury. When he was 19, he served a term for stealing a bike. Supposedly, he had married 7 women, at least, forcing money from all of them and eloped with another married woman. That woman he had tied to the floor, kept her for several days before deserting her. Another woman, he had get a job as a domestic servant to a family and had her rob the family, giving him the loot. Prior to his hanging, a large crowd gathered outside Maidstone Prison before dawn, but only legal witnesses could actually get to see the execution. Inside the prison, the chaplain opened Smith's cell door, and Smith followed him out, but then a guard came and pushed him back into his cell. It was too early. He would be left alone in his cell for the first time since the verdict. From John Ellis, famed official executioner of Great Britain. Quote, if ever a man had an opportunity to search his soul and display penitence, he had it then. I have often thought that it would surely be the most interesting thing in the whole of this remarkable case if one could learn what Smith did, and what passed through his mind as he stood there alone after getting that glimpse of the officials outside waiting to come in and take him forth and hang him. The experience was absolutely unique in my career." End quote. Then it was time. Guards marched on either side of Smith outside the short walk from his prison cell to the hanging scaffold. According to John Ellis, who I may have to do a future story about, Smith died with the last words, quote, "I am innocent of this crime," end quote. We're after the trial and hanging. In 1919, a newspaper looking back on this case would report that one of the women he had killed, it doesn't say which, would tell a neighbor about Smith that Smith would habitually get her alone in a room and stare at her for 2 or 3 hours. Once that was over, the woman was a bit out of her senses. A few days later, she would recover, and then he would do it again. She would then follow him as if in a trance. Some equate this with him having some sort of hypnotic power. I equate it to him being creepy as hell. And it's not the first time we've done a story about a fellow who, no offense, wasn't disarmingly handsome, wasn't rich, and yet somehow attracted the ladies. Was he innocent? I can be pretty wishy-washy, but no, I don't think so. This is when he should have read some tips for serial killers to read about changing up your murder game and not doing the same shtick each time. But luckily for many possible future women, he made that mistake. One death, the first death, sure, could have been an accident or epilepsy or something, but 2 more? Yes, some people have really bad luck. And some people murder repeatedly once they realize that the first time worked out well. He got money, and he kept getting away with it until he didn't. Again, please subscribe because I love bringing you content. See you.